picking back up where we left off, guys, we're going to start off with our Fast Five here. So it says, name two examples of representative democracy in colonial America. What was the Halfway Covenant? How did King Philip's War benefit the New England colonies? What was the major difference in the development of the New England colonies and the development of the Southern colonies? And what was the major difference in the voting requirements of those in New England colonies and of those in Virginia? So we'll be going over those during our live session as we start out this week. But we're going to pick back up with something called the Salem Witch Trials. And this is something that a lot of you are probably very familiar with. This is when this mass kind of hysteria is going to surround this town of Salem, and they're going to start accusing people of witchcraft. So it says in 1692 in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, a series of hearings were held for a group of individuals who were accused of witchcraft. In the end, 20 men and women were put to death for practicing witchcraft. And it says the mass hysteria of the Salem Witch Trials highlighted the dangers of religious extremism in colonial America, meaning when these people were accused of witchcraft, it is like a very, very high offense. And this is because of how religious they are, and they're very extreme. And what happens is when an individual gets accused, they're going to start kind of pointing fingers, and they're going to start accusing somebody else. So at the end, you have all these people who are standing trial that had really nothing to do with the actual event, and it's kind of like everyone trying to save their own selves. And these people are going to be kind of put on trial, and essentially they're going to be put to death. So for your, I guess, little packet, it says in 1692 in the town of Salem, what embroiled in the numerous public executions of, and that's witches. And it says how many of them were executed, and that's going to be 20 men and women. And then the real important one is number 6, which needs to be highlighted. It says, what did the Salem Witch Trials highlight about the religion in colonial New England? And that is the dangers of religious extremism. Okay. These are going to be some of the pictures portrayed of the trial. This is kind of showing you, who was accused and where they were. Again, they're having unreal punishments. This is an image of an individual being pressed to death, or what's going to happen is essentially they're going to ask him a question. He's got this blank, or I guess table or piece of wood on him, and they're going to start putting on stones, and they're going to be asking him questions, and he refuses to answer those questions or doesn't give them the answers that they want. And for each question that he does that to, they add another stone. That's being pressed to death. All right, so we're going to talk about Massachusetts and it's becoming a royal colony. So it says the events in England led to an increased control over North American colonies, both economic and religious. So for years, England had operated under the policy of solitary neglect, avoiding strict enforcement of laws pertaining to its colonies. However, in the 1660s, the Crown is going to pass a series of laws known as the Navigation Acts, which sought to regulate and restrict colonial trade. Massachusetts is going to oppose these acts, and they're going to refuse to obey them, as New England relied heavily on trade for income, right? So the idea is these New England colonies, they really, really, really need trade, and that's how they make most of their money, especially in comparison to the southern colonies. In the southern colonies, they don't do that as much because why? Well, they have longer growing seasons, they have better soil. In New England, they don't really have that, right? They have harsh winters, but what they do have is they have these deep water ports, and such as Boston, New York City. We'll get into that in a little bit. And they are going to, really, really rely on trade as far as their economic, welfare. So they're going to oppose this, obviously, because this is how that they make money, and they're going to start trying to smuggle certain goods in order to make that money back. So it says many merchants began illegally smuggling goods to other nations regardless of the decree of the king, meaning it doesn't matter. They don't really care. So again, this is another example of early, revolution tactics when you're talking about Americans or colonists starting to slowly fight back against the king. And it says all these events accumulated in the Massachusetts colony, which is becoming a royal colony in 1686. So a royal colony essentially means it's going to be more closely monitored and operated directly by the king, which makes sense because the goal of the colonies is to make as much money as possible for England. Well, where are they making most of their money? Well, it comes with trades, and right, it comes with the shipping off of goods and the shipping off of, this raw materials and all of that to England, which they can then take those raw materials and they can put them into factories, and then they can make their finished goods and send those goods to Africa. And this is hitting on something called the triangular trade system. And I know I did not really touch on this the other day, and the triangular trade system is very important. The economic system is going to be called mercantilism, and on your packet I'll go over this during the review, but mercantilism is going to be where the colonies are there for the economic benefit of the mother country in this case being England. Now, why is this important? Because if the United States or the colonies are not making England money, they're going to essentially quit giving them money, right? The idea is they need to make England money. So it's going to work like this in the triangular trade system. If you can imagine a triangle, and on my notes I have it drawn out for you. The triangle start with our first little triangle part, going from the United States or the colonies to England. What we're sending there is going to be raw materials. This is your lumber, wood, cotton, all that stuff. Okay, we're sending that to England. England is then taking those materials. They're making manufactured goods, finished products, and they are sending them down to West Africa. Okay, why are they sending them to West Africa? Well, that is where a large majority of the trade is going on in the world right now. So they're then in West Africa, what they're doing is they're getting slaves, and those slaves are being taken back on something called the Middle Passage to the United States, where they are going to help produce these unfinished goods and these raw materials. So that is known as the triangular trade. Okay, and again, the passage from West Africa to the United States is going to be known as the Middle Passage. All right, so again, some important things you need to highlight here is your navigation acts, solitary neglect, which is essentially that England is going to allow the United States to trade with who they want, which they will allow doing that again after the navigation acts. And essentially what's happening is when England allows the colonies to trade with whomever they want, the colonies are getting a taste of, they can do this themselves. They can do this without the constant watch over of England and the constant looking of goods and prices and all of that. All right, so this is New England. All right, and then we're going to get back to the mid-Atlantic colonies. So Dutch and New Amsterdam. So it says in the 1600s, Dutch used a small island at the mouth of the Hudson River as a fort to protect its growing interest in the fur trade. Okay, so after a series of conflicts, the city of New Amsterdam is eventually going to end up in the hands of the British, and that is 1667. Now, the British is going to rename the city New York City. Okay, so this is how New York becomes a thing. This is important when you're looking at New York. This is like the setup of New York. If you've been in New York, it's nice because everything is in it's in squares. You got that block system. So if I'm on like 2nd Avenue and Prince, and they go, okay, well, you got to go to 51st Ave. Well, I just go down, 49 more times or whatever until I get to 51st, and I can just stay on Prince. Atlanta's not like that, as you know. So this is kind of the nice thing of New York City. Now, another guy we got to talk about is this guy by the name of William Penn. He's going to establish Pennsylvania. So it says, in the mid-17th century, William Penn established the colony of Pennsylvania, which literally means Penn's Wood. So, like Penn University, William Penn, Pennsylvania, you got to remember, you got to be able to connect William Penn. He's going to go there, and he's going to create this as a safe haven for a specific group. So the colony is a haven for a religious group known as the Quakers. So, literally on the test, if you can connect William Penn, Pennsylvania, and the Quakers, you're good to go. The rich farmland and numerous rivers allowed Pennsylvania and other mid-Atlantic colonies to become rich through agriculture and fur trade. Okay, and this is kind of the provenance of Pennsylvania. If you all do not know where Pennsylvania is, that is where it's located. And then if you look in there where Philadelphia is, Philadelphia plays a major role when talking about important cities and the colonies as we go through the American Revolution. Okay, settlement of French Quebec. So the French in Quebec, the north of the English colonies of North America, the French founded a colony that they called Quebec. Quebec was largely settled by Catholics, and many missions were established in the colony. The French were not interested in creating permanent settlements in North America, but rather than make a profit in the fur trade, especially on beaver fur. One important legacy of the fur trade was the creation of the cooperation between the French and the Native Americans. This cooperation would eventually lead to war between England and France. So let me kind of set up this as we finish this up. Okay, so this is important because the French, they're not in the colonies for the purpose of making money, right? Or excuse me, they're not in the colonies for the purpose of staying there. They are in the colonies for the purpose of making money. The French, that's all they want to do. They want to get in, make money, and get out. The English are not really going to like that, and that's because they kind of are looking at North America as their own little baby and their own little thing, and they don't want anybody else kind of coming in and taking their economic opportunity. Well, the French develop a good relationship with Native Americans, and they're the ones that help them out in the fur trade so much. You're saying, Coach, like, why does this matter? Why are you telling us this? Because when we talk about the American Revolution, it is, very important of kind of understanding not only why the French are helping us, but also going back to something called the French and Indian War. All right, so the French and Indian War is going to be important, and we'll talk about that later. But what's happening is because of the Native Americans' relationship with the French when talking about the fur trade, they are going to be the ones that are going to side with the French when you talk about this war. So when we talk about the French and Indian War, the reason that it is called that is because Great Britain is fighting against the French and the Indians. So really, you have the Native Americans and the French versus the colonists and Great Britain. And that is going to be the end of our first packet here. So again, if you guys are going through your packets and you have any questions, I'm just hitting on the major points during this lecture. So please be sure that you ask me during Zoom. You ask me during our live meetings, and I will fill in the rest of the questions that you are unable to complete.